So on to session 3, which we will be talking about the research. So I mentioned at the beginning, it's in segment 1, that there's a disconnect between how well people perform on standard neurocognitive tests and then their personal experience of how their cognitive function has changed. And so we've been trying to find better ways to measure that. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of them just briefly today. The School of Health Professions had been doing some research with something called task-evoked pupillary response, which basically is a small camera, it's completely non-invasive, that watches someone's pupils while they're expending cognitive effort. And it turns out that as you expend cognitive effort, your pupils dilate. So it's something that can be measured. So we thought that sounded pretty intriguing from an oncology perspective. So we did a recent study for women who had been through breast cancer therapy and women who had not had a cancer experience. And we had them do some of our standard cognitive tests. We had them complete some self-report instruments on how they felt their cognitive function was. And we compared those two groups. And then we had the camera look at pupil dilation while people were doing the cognitive tests. And what we found actually was pretty exciting, was what we'd hoped we'd see was women who had been through the breast cancer experience reported more cognitive issues on the questionnaires than women who had not. Both groups performed equally well on the cognitive tests as we expected, but the women who'd been through breast cancer treatment had more pupil dilation during those cognitive tests than women who hadn't. So they were working harder, much like that MRI.
Joseph this afternoon, if he wants to go to the basketball banquet.
I think someone might
Chris,
have.
you might go ahead and mute yourself.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
So people, we were able to demonstrate that more cognitive effort was being expended by the women who'd been through the cancer experience. And so we had been hopeful to study this further and have been seeking additional funding to do so. So far, we haven't found a grant mechanism, so stay tuned on that. The other thing we did recently for 2 different populations, men with prostate cancer who were going through testosterone suppression, also called androgen deprivation therapy, and women with breast cancer who had been through chemotherapy. There were a couple of studies where we did some qualitative interviews and we were able to record those and then review the transcripts of those recordings for part of our study analysis. One of my colleagues has been involved in something called psycholinguistic analysis, which sort of in common English is a measure of speech complexity. And that's kind of a surrogate for cognitive function. So we looked at psycholinguistic analyses for these study transcripts that we had collected during these 2 types of research and did indeed see some correlation between the psycholinguistic variables, people's performance on cognitive tests, and people's self-report of cognitive function. So this is really, really early stage research, not ready for prime time yet. But the vision, the sort of hopeful outcome to this would be if we can continue to demonstrate that this might be of value, eventually we might be able to have an app developed where someone could just record 2 or 3 minutes of speech based on responding to a question that required some reflection. And we might be able to use that as an objective measure of cognitive function going forward as someone would begin their cancer treatment. So that's something that we're exploring. I mentioned earlier on in segment 1 that we're also interested to know whether some of the new targeted agents for immunotherapy have an impact on cognitive function. The reason why we suspect they might is they stimulate an inflammatory response to the cancer. And that would involve the release of some of those cytokines that I told you about. So we have a study going on right now that's observational, where we're enrolling people with any type of cancer who are starting a checkpoint inhibitor drug, which is one of the types of immunotherapy that's pretty promising right now. And we're asking them to take part in some cognitive tests at baseline and 6 months later. We're asking their permission to have an extra tube of blood when they have a normal blood drawn, so that we're not asking them to have an extra stick, but we're stealing a little bit of the sample that's drawn when they're having their blood drawn normally to see what changes in those cytokines might be over time. So we've finished recruiting to this study. We've finished our baseline assessments, and now we're collecting our 6 months assessments. And maybe the next time I give this talk, I'll be able to share what those results are. We also have been collaborating with Hiroshima University in Japan on an intervention that's a combination of exercise plus mindfulness, which I told you is something we're really interested in. So this is an intervention that involves cycling, a portable cycle that people are able to use in their homes. You can see a picture of it there. It's just a floor mount that you use a standard chair with. It's connected by Bluetooth to an iPad. And while the individuals are cycling, they're playing a brain game. So there's a little bit of a mind-body connection. The faster someone cycles, the faster the game goes. So we're looking at a number of things in conjunction with this intervention here in Kansas, at a facility in Denver, and then at a facility in Japan. And Indiana is involved as well because they're helping us with some of the qualitative analysis. We're looking at self-report questionnaires, much like we've done in our other studies. And for this study, we also have been collecting the little finger stick blood spot test, not to look at omega-3 fatty acids this time, but to look at those cytokines that I mentioned to you earlier. And we've actually finished the study in Kansas, and they're still finishing it up in Denver and Japan. So we haven't gotten to analyze our data yet. But we were able to analyze the data from the finger stick blood spots, which we just did here in the Kansas area. And we did find that there was an increase in one of the growth factors that's associated with brain health, which is insulin growth factor 1. And that actually correlated the way we thought it should with improvement in cognitive testing. So we'll probably continue to look at this in future studies. This was, a small pilot, but gave us some kind of intriguing results. For men with prostate cancer, we have been doing a diet and exercise intervention to try to reduce some of the side effects that go along with suppressing testosterone. And we also have looked at how this might affect cognitive function. During this study, though, what we learned was men on androgen deprivation therapy have issues with sleep. So we subsequently conducted a pilot to do that cognitive behavioral training for insomnia that I told you about for men that were experiencing treatment for prostate cancer. And we really were excited. We had great adherence. We didn't have anyone drop out of the study. We had 15 men take part in this small pilot, and we saw really significant improvement in self-reported sleep quality as a result. What the men shared with us was that they didn't really like the devices that we used to measure activity because they were kind of big and clunky, and they didn't give the men any feedback on their sleep metrics, which is what, of course, they were really interested in. So we're in the process right now of writing a couple of grant applications that would allow us to test a new type of wrist-worn device that would give real-time feedback on sleep improvement. We're going to do a study for women with breast cancer, and we're also then going to continue to look at men with prostate cancer. So if we're lucky and get those grants, I'll be coming back to Judy to see if people might be interested in taking part in that research. But what I'm most excited to tell you about today is the study that we have going on right now. And this is the one that I mentioned that some of you might be interested in, depending on how far you are out from having completed your cancer therapy. But this is another iteration of that Emerging from the Haze cognitive rehabilitation program that I told you about. We're seeking to enroll 90 adults that either have stage 1 through 3 solid tumors or Hodgkin or non-Hodgkin lymphoma, who are experiencing some of the issues that we've been describing today, who received chemotherapy at least 6 months ago, but not more than 5 years ago. That's kind of the window that we're looking at for this particular study. And what we're asking people to do that are interested is fill out some online questionnaires at baseline, at week 10, and 4 weeks later, and we'll be randomly assigning people into one of 3 groups. Group 1 will take part in a once a week for 10-week Zoom sessions of the cognitive behavioral training program that I described to you, which covers all of the things over on the right-hand side of the slide, plus some exercises to help improve short-term memory. And that would be delivered live, real time. So that group will meet on Thursdays at 11:30 Central Time. The people that get randomized to group 2 are attending the exact same program content, still on Zoom, still once a week for 10 weeks, but together, and I'm facilitating that group, instead of watching the live delivery coming from Cedars-Sinai, we together are watching the pre-recorded program. So it's exact same content, and we're still going to discuss it and have questions and answers, but it would then be a pre-recorded program instead of live. The people that get randomized to group 3 are what we call the wait list group, who will fill out those 3 sets of questionnaires for us before they attend the program. And that way we'll have 2 groups who have received the content, one live, one pre-recorded, and one group who hasn't received it yet. And we'll be comparing improvement on the cognitive function reports between those 3 groups to help us know if the pre-recorded session is as effective as live, and hopefully both of them are more effective than not having had it yet. So it is supported by a small grant, so we're able to give a small thank you stipend to people that take part. And we're also conducting a companion study for up to 60 people who are taking part in the Emerging from the Haze study. I mentioned that we're very interested in a better way to assess cognitive function than our standard tests. And we're looking at an app that's under development right now called the MindCap. And MindCap is a lot like playing brain games on your phone, but the games have been designed to measure short-term memory, processing speed, and the ability to shift back and forth between tasks. So people that choose to take part in this optional companion study, we would give them instructions on how to download the app. The big ask, the labor-intensive part of the whole thing, is called the normal phase, where we're asking people to take these 10-minute game playing sessions 3 times a day till they hit their normal, which usually takes about a week or so. And then people shift gears into what's called monitoring phase, where we ask them to play the games for 3 days a week at 10 minutes at a time while they're in that 14 weeks of our data collection. And we're also able to give a small thank you stipend for people that take part in this. We're right now enrolling for both of these studies for our second group, which actually starts up April 20th and 21st. And then we'll continue to enroll till we hit our 90 people for Emerging from the Haze and our 60 people for the sub-study. So I imagine we'll be doing that again in August and then again next January. So for anybody who thinks that might be interesting, we can arrange time to talk separately, and I can give you more information about how to sign up if it's something that sounds good to you. So with that, I think I'll stop sharing so we can see each other, if that's okay, Judy. There we go. And see if there's any questions.
So what's the definition of solid tumor?
So that would be like breast or colorectal or prostate or lung or head and neck or
Okay.
just about anything really.
So if we were interested in knowing more about this study, we would just email you, or what would we do?
That's the easiest thing to do. And I will put my email back in the chat. Yeah, so shoot me an email and then we would just look at our calendars and find time to spend a little bit of time on the phone together. And I could tell you a little bit more about it and you could tell me a little bit about your situation. And I would then email the consent forms so you could look them over and, you know, see it in black and white, see if you had questions and when we could go from there, depending on what you thought.
Okay.
Hi, Jamie, it's Karen. I actually have another question. Is that MindCap app, and is it available commercially now, or is it still just in development and so only available to study participants?
Right now, it's still in development for this type of application, but it is commercially available for like industry companies, if you will. It was developed actually by the Department of Defense. They used it for assessing cognitive readiness for people that were in the military. It's also been looked at for like airline, pilots. And then there are also some things being done with places where people do shift work, because the errors, as you know, really skyrocket when people's circadian rhythms get messed up and they're not getting their normal sleep. So they want to make sure that they're having safe work practices. So yeah.
Interesting.
Isn't
Thank
it?
you, Jamie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll be curious how it all turns out, but it's been intriguing to start to have people experience it. The folks who went through the first cohort are just finishing up, and I'm interested in getting their feedback.
This is Judy. I unmuted myself, and so I'm going to jump back in. I highly recommend that you consider participating in one or more of these studies. It's so exciting that this kind of cutting edge research is happening in Kansas with one of our own researchers and her international partners. So I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you, Judy. I appreciate that.